Good morning, everyone. This is the Committee on Law and Government. We have established a quorum with Councilman Kenney, Committee's Vice Chair, Councilman Good, Councilman Heenan, and myself, Bill Greenlee. Ms. Marconi, will you please read the title of the bill that's before us today, please?
Bill number 140001, an ordinance amending Chapter 10-800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Safety by providing for ending the existing procedure of mandatory custodial arrests for the crime of marijuana possession and by requiring the reporting of the number of arrests and related information with respect to those arrested for marijuana possession, all under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you. Our first witness.
Francis Healy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please identify yourself and proceed.
Sure. Good morning, Councilman Greenlee, Vice Chairman Kenney, and other members of the Committee on Law and Government. My name is Francis Healy, and I am the Special Advisor to Commissioner Ramsey. And I'm here with Director of Public Safety, Michael Resnick. On behalf of the Commissioner, thank you for allowing me to voice the Police Department's opinion on Bill number 140001. The Police Department understands the sponsor's concerns over arrest of individuals possessing low levels of marijuana. I've had multiple conversations with the sponsor and his staff, and this issue, and the Commissioner Ramsey and Michael and Director Resnick recently met with the councilman to discuss this bill. These conversations have been productive, and we look forward to continuing these discussions in the future. The Police Department, with the rest of the administration, supports the basic premise of this bill, that custodial arrest should not be required for the typical case of a small amount of marijuana possession. We do believe that custodial arrest may be necessary in certain cases, although based on the amendments that I understand will be offered this morning, I believe the PPD and the sponsor are in agreement about those cases, or which cases those are. And in general, we believe that these amendments are a positive step. The current process for arresting individuals with low levels of marijuana are governed by the rules of criminal procedure, which are set forth by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. While it may be that these rules are currently written, must be amended, we are also open to the possibility that the existing rule can be reinterpreted to do away with the requirement of a custodial arrest in all cases. Either way, all elements of the Philadelphia criminal justice system must be in sync. Processes across the police department, the district attorney's office, and the courts are interdependent, so they must be changed in step with each other. We believe this goal can be achieved, and we will work towards its realization. I would respectfully submit that the most effective way to achieve this goal is to continue the process initiated by the sponsor. That is, bring together the police department, the district attorney's office, and the courts to finish the work of determining new policies and procedures that will do away with mandatory custodial arrest in all cases of marijuana possession. Let me reiterate, the police department is ready to fully participate in and assist with that process. This concludes my testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Resnick, do you have anything to add?
No testimony,
Okay.
Councilman.
First, please let the record reflect that Councilman O'Brien, a member of the committee, is present. Councilman Kenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Mr. Healy, Mr. Resnick, and Law Department, Mr. Merkin, and the Police Commissioner and the DA for their cooperation in this process. I mean, I think we all agree that the number of hours that police are taken off the street during the course of a year to process these issues could be better spent fighting real crime, and that the stigma of having an arrest record and being taken into custody and the demographic information we have on who's getting arrested, I think all kind of culminates into a change for needing policy. So I thank you for your continued efforts and for your continued cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman O'Brien.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for coming late to the testimony. I was trying to get up to speed on this, and I have to put on my Harrisburg hat and my conscience, where I am reluctant to support something that changes a misdemeanor to a summary. I believe that the state legislature has the sole authority to do that. But in looking at other jurisdictions, and I fully understand what Councilman Kenney is doing, and if I caught the importance of your testimony, in other counties, it's my understanding that what they do is by agreement, they make this a summary at the point of arrest. And they check everybody out to make sure that they don't have records and whatnot. But the district attorney, if I read between the lines, to the SAM program, small amounts of marijuana, has gone as far as they possibly can on the record And in a case, if I were charged with a small amount of marijuana, the appropriate disposition would probably be that I'm charged, I am arraigned, I go into court, and the district attorney pleads that down to disorderly conduct. My challenge is here, and I fully support the efficiency that they're using in other counties, is what do you charge with? It's kind of a dishonest charge if you initially charge a summary. I don't know how you do that. Do you charge them with disorderly conduct? And if I am an individual, how do I, if I don't want to pay the fine, if I'm not from Montgomery County where I might have the cash and it's wrong to, it's kind of challenging for me to take a day off from work to do it, so it's easier to pay the fine. How does the DA then stand this up? Because the marijuana goes. And I'll ask one more question. If you decriminalize this and you say that the arresting officer can charge with a summary, and then they take the drugs, what do they do with the drugs?
Well, Councilman, let me just start. You raised some very interesting concerns that the police department has
And that's
as
why I
well.
was late. And I fully support what Councilman Kenney is doing. I think that this is a low-level offense for a very insignificant amount of marijuana, and I apologize for grouping all those questions.
And that's where our negotiations have begun. The issues are, yes, it is a state law violation. That is a problem for the Philadelphia Police Department. It's an M3. It hasn't been downgraded, and I don't believe Councilman Kenney's bill is anyway trying to downgrade the crime. It's the processing of the arrest. So we're trying to change the processes of the arrest throughout the state. There are other mechanisms that are used, which are called the summons procedure, where people aren't necessarily taken into custody, but they're issued summonses for low-level misdemeanors. That's an option possibly available to us, but it doesn't downgrade the crime. But that takes a coordinated effort between the courts, the police department, and the DA's office to make sure that process works. We don't currently work under the summons process in Philadelphia. We make a custodial arrest, they're preliminarily arraigned, and that's how the process works in Philadelphia. I'm not saying that can't be revisited, and that's something we'd be looking forward to revisit. The notion of decriminalizing it or lowering it is problematic. If I can't, I know what some of the counties are doing. They're making a summary citation for disorderly conduct. Technically, that's legally improper. Like,
Right.
as you mentioned, you can't cite disorderly conduct because that is not a violation. I mean, low-level possession of marijuana is a misdemeanor. If they want to change it to a summary, I mean, that would help everybody. I said, but as it stands right now, we're betwixt and between the state law and trying to increase the efficiencies that the councilman's looking at, and we have to look at everything, because even if we process the arrest as summonses in Philadelphia, the same amount of paperwork and police processing time still needs to be included, so there needs to be another way, and that's what we're looking for. This as being the beginning of hopefully some longer discussions to see how we can manage this process in Philadelphia better.
So not to be convoluted, because sometimes I can be that way, your position is you welcome Councilman Kenney's ordinance, but you would rather do it in-house and work these conversations out.
We support the policy behind the proposed
support the
legislation,
policy.
Councilman. Yes, the fact that it would decrease processing time. Officers don't have to bring people in, process them inside. Officers can stay out on the street, patrol. So we do definitely support the policy behind the legislation. As Captain Healy stated, and as we told the councilman when we met, it's probably a good idea that we all sit down, the councilman with the CJAB, where the police department, the courts, the DA, the PD will be present, and we can discuss how we can go about achieving these results.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Heenan?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Thank you for coming in. Could you explain the process of the SAM program that the district attorney has implemented and how that alters the police officers, custodial, I guess, criminal procedures, or does it does it not?
It doesn't change anything that the police officers do on the street. That occurs after the arrest has occurred.
The front end is the same.
Okay, so would this be codifying a policy and a procedure that's in place from the district, collaboratively with the district attorney's office and the courts?
I honestly don't think so. I mean, the arrest procedures are governed by Pennsylvania State Rules of Criminal Procedure. How we process an arrest is irrelevant of how the district attorney's office chooses to prosecute or divert that case.
But along with the court, But I think in your testimony, you stated that this is a step in the right direction. Is that correct? Especially with the amendments that are offered here today.
Right. We support the premise behind the bill that if we could expedite this proceeding or processing time, it's a benefit to all.
Right.
The thing is, right now, as it stands, we haven't removed any of the requirements on the police department report-wise. And it would still stand. Police reports would still need to be filed, complaints would need to be filed, proper receipts need to be filled out for any marijuana that's seized, testing has to be done. All that kind of minutia needs to be addressed, so as we really truly want to expedite the process from the police department side, it's not just as simply as writing a citation on the street as a summary citation. In a best case scenario, that would be probably the best case scenario if it were downgraded to a summary citation of some sort, and then we could just do the summary citation on the street. That would be a lot easier. But right now, state law is something we have to deal with. It is a misdemeanor, and we can't change that.
Well, from a policy perspective, I think with I assume that this legislation is looking to codify some of the procedures after the fact, on the front end, whether state law needs to be changed or not, to help, the police department and everybody is working in sync together. Do you, in the spirit and policy overview of this legislation, do you believe that's correct?
I applaud Councilman Kenney for bringing everybody together to speak on this issue. So we are moving in a positive direction. Without his help, we wouldn't even be talking about this issue right now.
Okay.
So how we get it done, I think it's something we work together to make it work somehow, shape, or form. I just don't know how that is yet.
No doubt about it. Listen, that happens a lot with legislation that's passed here. Question about summons. Other summons that maybe other jurisdictions, or let's start with our own here, Philadelphia, other summons that are issued, how many summons would be issued to an individual that then again it elevates it to a higher level?
Well, let me explain.
So
there's no
multiple summons,
Yeah, let me explain.
when does it become a crime?
So there's no miscommunication. A summons that we're talking about is a summons that's at the initiation of legal process in the rules of criminal procedure. It is not equivalent to a summary citation or anything like that. What it's done is, if I'm a police officer, I stop you for a low-level offense. In the counties, DUIs, low-level DUIs are processed in this manner. I take all your information and then I release you. You might get fingerprinted or photographed, but then you're released. And what happened, I submit paperwork to the court, and the court then issues a summons to the individual to appear in court at a later time. So it's not something that the police department issues, it's something that actually the court issues in other counties. We don't process arrest that way in Philadelphia. If it's a site arrest, I take the body in and you're processed that way. But there is an alternate mechanism to do the same arrest via a summons. But don't think the summons that we're talking about is equivalent in any shape or form to the summary citation. They're very, very different. You're still charged with a misdemeanor offense. It's just you're not processed through the court system. You're not arrested, arraigned. A lot of times you're just released on the scene, but you get a nice little subpoena in the mail to show up in court and address the misdemeanor offense.
I know.
Thank you, Councilman. First, let me record reflect that Councilman Jones, the majority leader, is present. Before I recognize Councilman Kenney, just a quick question, if you know. I know you said in answer to one of Councilman O'Brien's questions that what they're doing in Montgomery County and some of these other places can be legally problematic. Do you know, have any issues been raised out there legally that has caused a problem for say, Montgomery County's policy, if you know?
I don't know. Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I think Councilman Kenney might have the answer. Councilman?
Yeah, there's really been no issues raised either in Pittsburgh or in Montgomery County relative to their policies. The other issue is from, I think, where Councilman Heenan was going. For example, if you figure out what the process is and a young 19, 20-year-old gets stopped and found and processed the way we would like to see them processed, if you don't show up in court, you're going to get arrested next time you get stopped. So because you're going to have a warrant for failure to appear. If you're driving a car under the influence of marijuana, you're going to be arrested. If you have other detainers on you when you're stopped, if you can't show who you are by ID, you'll be arrested. I mean, this is for basically for the person who doesn't have a lot of or any contact with law enforcement, that messes up small amount of mess up, and winds up not having to be put in a jail cell. I mean, I think that's my goal.
Right.
Now, if you're a habitual abuser of this program, of the SAM program, the DA's office tells me that at some point in time, they'll hit a threshold and they'll begin to charge, and that'll be, he won't have that, or she won't have that option again. So there are I think this is for the one-timer, I think, who will get the summons, will go to court, will do what they have to do, make amends. I mean, summary drinking citation, I've talked to people at Penn State, there's 40,000 kids up there, it's like a regular thing, and they process them the regular way. And I guess the parents wind up paying the fine half the time, but somebody pays something. And that's the way they process through a district justice. So I do think we can get there. And I just think that 4,200 arrests a year, especially with the death. If you look at some of the numbers which really are frightening me, is that we looked at Roxborough as a test case in the 5th Police District. There were no arrests for possession of marijuana in the 5th Police District. Now, no one may be smoking up there, but I doubt that. In every other police district, there were some arrests for marijuana possession. The majority of those arrested in every district were black. Regardless of the percentage of white, black in the district, South Philly and Northeast, for example, for instance, still majority black arrests. And I think that it's you can fight, you can argue about the policy of stop and frisk. I have my issues with it. But if you're likely to be stopped and frisked, you're more likely to be caught with weed. And I think that that's really what it's coming down to. And that's why I want to see that inequity addressed. And I think, for your testimony, you've agreed that you'd like to see that inequity addressed too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman O'Brien?
Again, I would just like to follow up on what Councilman Kenney said, and that statistic jumped out at me. And probing into those numbers, I just want to ask a simple thing. The concentration of police resources usually goes to high crime areas. And is it possible that the concentration of police resources in high crime areas where there's a high concentration of African Americans results in arrests for marijuana possession, whereas in Roxborough, people may be smoking it in their house?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Jones?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the record, there is no marijuana in Roxborough at all.
In the whole 4th District? In the whole 4th District?
4th District.
Okay, all right.
There is none. But I have a few questions, and I think and thank you, Councilman, for bringing this to our local attention. It's a trend that is being considered around the nation and is a timely issue. I have a couple of questions. So if we had a perfect world where things just kind of went into a nice, neat citation box, if you would, this would be treated more like an open container of alcohol, beer. If someone was sitting on their steps or out in a public purview on a bench, park bench, and had an open container of alcohol, this would now be reduced down to that level of offense?
That's not what this bill is accomplishing,
So,
no.
help me.
In a perfect world, if you wanted to solve the problem per se, yes, that would be one mechanism that would reduce the police time involved and the custodial arrest of individuals on the street.
And so that officer would write a ticket, and that would be it?
Right. But that would require the state legislature
Yeah, and I heard that part of the
Right.
testimony, that it's not within our purview
No.
to change it from a misdemeanor to a summary offense.
Correct.
So I got that.
But we could all work together to change the process by which we initiate the criminal process for people with a small amount of marijuana.
And so at some point, we will determine what is a small amount of marijuana, or do we have that already?
We're guided by state law that says under, what, 30 grams?
30? I'm not real familiar
Never
with
mind,
the
it's a couple cigarettes, really.
couple cigarettes?
Yeah.
Okay. And I heard Councilman Kenney talk about repeat offenders, and that there would be some type of threshold by which if this person constantly is picked up for this summary offense, it would then ramp it up a notch to go to the next level?
Well, if those individuals, I would assume, would not be afforded the process by which we're all trying to put in place, where they're not taken into custody, they're not photographed and fingerprinted, where they're just issued their paperwork, where we gather their information and mail them a summons to appear in court. So those individuals would not be afforded that expedited processing. We would take them actually into custody, or if people failed to appear, they have detainers, we would actually effect an arrest and take those people into custody.
So if they had no other issues or commissions of a crime while having this marijuana, they would be offered this one-time summary relationship.
Well, these are the issues that we need to discuss, because the officer on the street's not going to have that information
That's right.
readily available. So the district attorney's office in the charging function, whether or not they're going to divert or not divert, I mean, that's probably where the biggest impetus would be, because the DA after the fact would be able to determine whether or not there's been multiple arrests or anything along those lines. But I mean, that's why I think we work together and come up with a good, solid plan.
And this would in no way decriminalize the use of marijuana, because then you run into a whole host of a host of complications, such as was the person driving
Right.
under the influence?
Right, we're not
or
talking
was
about
a-
decriminalization.
Or was a police officer, recreationally using this? And so it has a whole nother level of scrutiny that we need to understand beyond the citation level offense, what things now are impacted by our kind of tolerance of this,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
And that has to be flushed out.
Correct.
And who's going to do the flushing of this?
Quite honestly, I believe the councilman has started the process. I mean, we're talking amongst ourselves of the three criminal justice players in the city is the police, DA, and the courts. I think that's the first step, that we need to get on the same page and see, and that's the first step. We haven't got there yet. We haven't sat in the same room yet to figure out what we can do to expedite the process within the boundaries that we have or with the confines of the laws that we're currently under. How can we do it better? And I think we always should strive to see, from a legislator's perspective, I don't make laws. We enforce them. So if the public believes it's time for laws to be changed, it's, that would be your purview.
Well, these are interesting times, to say the least, and I think it's truly appropriate for us to consider this now. It does strike me as where the thresholds, and if it's 3 times that a person is given that ticket or citation, that it bumps up. I mean, these are the details that I would want to know about, because I don't want to give a green light kind of license for young people to sit on the sidewalk and enjoy their particular recreational drug. I really want to make sure that we don't throw gasoline on a fire, if you would. Right. So I look forward to hearing the discussion and seeing where it takes us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Councilman Kenny?
Councilman, the other issue too is one of practicality of having an arrest record and trying to get a job. I mean, it's hard enough for a young person to find a job now. Now, there's a period of time after you go through SAM where you can go and have your record expunged, but that's another process, and a process that costs money. And if you're waiting for SAM to kick in and you're out there looking for work, you have to disclose the fact you've been arrested. So that's another issue for our young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions, comments for these witnesses? Seeing none, thank you both very much.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Marconi, our next panel.
Paul Messing and Major Neil Franklin.
Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Whoever would like to start, and please identify yourself and proceed.
My name is Paul Messing. I'm an attorney. I'm here speaking on behalf of the ACLU.
Go ahead.
So let me, before I get to the proposed bill and some of the discussions that you've already had, let me give you a little background. In 2011, my partner Dave Rudofsky and I and the ACLU filed a class action lawsuit in Bailey relating to the stop and frisk program and issues of racial disparity in the implementation of that program. The lawsuit was actually very quickly resolved. A settlement agreement was entered into, and a consent decree was issued by a federal district court judge. And we've been monitoring it and doing a lot of work with the city and the police department over the last 3 years. It's an ongoing process, and the process will continue for some time. Let me tell you what we've seen, and we provided the third report to the court and master, and if members of the committee don't have it, I'm happy to send it to you. Here's what we found over the past 3 years. There's been a modest decrease in the number of stops. That is a good thing. But nearly half of the stops, about 47% of these stops, pedestrian stops, are made without legal cause. Almost half, about 43% of the frisks are made without legal cause. There are very, very few arrests made, about 5%, as a result of these stops, and many of those arrests aren't for the reasons that these folks were stopped in the first instance. They're for things like disorderly conduct, for people that protested a little too loudly about being stopped for no reason. And while the main goal of stop and frisk laws and this stop and frisk initiative was to rid the Philadelphia streets of guns, rarely were guns found. Maybe 1 in 1,000, and many of those cases involve people who actually had permits to carry guns. So, one of the things that we began to notice was where there were seizures of contraband, which was very rare, many of those involved seizures of small amounts of marijuana. So we started to focus our data analysis on the marijuana possession charges. And here's what we found. And the statistics have been the same in the 3 periods that we've looked at, which are 2-month periods in 2011, 2012, and 2013. 94% are African American and Latino. 94%. Now bear in mind, all statistics nationally and locally in Philadelphia indicate that marijuana use tends to be a little higher among whites than among blacks, yet 94%. In response to something that Councilman Tasco raised earlier, which was police deployment.
Just for the record, that's not Councilman Matasco, it's Councilman O'Brien.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'll make sure I do that. There was a point raised by Councilman O'Brien about the issue of police deployment affecting this data. We analyzed the data by police district. And what we found was in the predominantly black districts, everybody arrested for possession of marijuana was black. In the predominantly white districts, most people arrested for possession of marijuana were black. In one district, as Councilman Kenney pointed out, the 5th District, Roxborough-Manayunk, a predominantly white area, in 2011, 0 possession of marijuana arrests. 2012, 0. 2013, there was 1 arrest. It was for a young African-American male. So the racial disparity issue is very, very disturbing. And I think this bill is important because it directly confronts that issue and tries to do something about it. So there are all these questions that Fran Healy and the city has raised about, well, how do you do this? Because there's this conflict between Pennsylvania law, which rates this as a misdemeanor, although it's a funny law because most misdemeanors in Pennsylvania are graded offenses that carry up to 5 years in prison. Possession of small amounts of marijuana under 30 grams carries 90 days, which while the act may refer to it as a misdemeanor, really is the same as a summary offense, a 90-day and a $300 fine. The problem that we have, in addition to the obvious racial disparity issue, is the continued criminalization of this offense means, as has already been pointed out by members of this committee, bench warrants are issued if you fail to appear in court. There's a criminal record of these that is difficult to expunge, and of course expungement is only part of the process. With all of the vendors that troll the internet for arrest information, it's there even if you get it expunged. And then even for the SAM program that now exists, there's a $200 program fee. A lot of people can't afford it, and a lot of people are kicked out of that program because they can't afford it. And the same would happen with a $200 fine. So what do you do? What's the solution? Well, I agree with Fran Healy. I think that the stakeholders here, this committee, the district attorney, the police department, and the court system need to sit down. There are lots of options. The district attorney has broad discretion as to whether and when to prosecute and what charge to prosecute. The police department have broad discretion in the same connection. And it seems to me there are ways that everybody can agree to make this a summary offense or even a code violation. Washington, D.C., just last week, passed a new law saying that possession of small amounts of marijuana will be considered a civil code violation that carries a $25 fine. It's awaiting the mayor's signature. My understanding is it passed something like 10-2. It will be signed and enacted. There is nothing that would stop this body, together working with the district attorney, the police, and the courts, from coming up with the very same kind of solution. As I said, if you look at the citations that are issued now for summary offenses, there's a checkoff for disorderly conduct under the Pennsylvania Crimes Code, and there's a checkoff for disorderly conduct, which is a little different, under the city ordinance, under the city code. Police officers frequently check off the box for city ordinance, same with obstructing the highway. Underage drinking is frequently treated as a disorderly conduct. The reason is that it's, carries this, in addition to the criminal penalty, it carries this automatic license suspension, which lots of people don't want minor offenders, no prior record to be subjected to, so they charge them as disorderly conduct. This is done all the time. It could be done here. So the ACLU strongly believes that this bill is a very positive step in the right direction. The devil's in the details. And now everybody's got to sit down, the major stakeholders, and come up with a viable, workable solution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Messing. Before we have any questions, let's hear from Major Franklin, and we'll have questions for both. Sir,
thank you.
please identify yourself and proceed.
Yes. I'm retired Major Neil Franklin from the Maryland State Police, currently the Executive Director for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is an international organization of law enforcement professionals who advocate for serious drug policy reform around the globe, but most of our work here is done here in the state. So thank you for allowing me to testify before you today, members of the Philadelphia City Council. And although I may currently live in Maryland, I was born in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which is where most of my family is from, so not that much.
It's a little closer, yeah.
It's a little close. First of all, I just want to thank you for this progress, for moving forward. I wish Baltimore would take similar steps to deal with the very similar issues of arrests that we have, the many, many arrests that we have in Baltimore City for marijuana possession violations and throughout the state of Maryland. So I applaud you for that effort. I just have a brief statement that I want to read, but before I do that, as Paul said, one of the main things we're looking at here is discretion. And there's a ton of it at both levels of the prosecutor's office and police. Police across this country have a great deal of discretion. You don't have to charge any of your citizens under Maryland law for any crime. We're talking about marijuana possession here today, which is a misdemeanor, a very, very small crime in the scheme of things. You can adopt a city ordinance, and you can handle all of your marijuana possession incidences under an ordinance, and you don't even have to apply state law. That is an option. You can do that. You have that discretion. So let me move forward here real quick. And my background briefly is 34 years in law enforcement, retired from the Maryland State Police. Most of my time there was spent in narcotics investigation and criminal investigation, commanded multi-jurisdictional drug task forces, and I was the head of training for both the Maryland State Police and the Baltimore Police Department throughout those 30-something years. So despite recent reports of violent crime reduction, every major city across this country has a serious high violent crime rate. The problems that we, in assessing violent crime, is that we relate it to recent crime rates, usually no further back than 10 or 15 years. Our political leaders and law enforcement fail dramatically in critical thinking. What is the root causation for crime? What are the social conditions responsible for the foundation and the building blocks of violent crime, and what policies either contribute to this condition or do nothing in providing relief. Today's policing involves the strategic placement of police officers according to real-time crime conditions. Models such as CompStat have been adopted by police agencies throughout the nation. This is the use of real-time statistics in discovering, analyzing, and responding to crime trends. Crime suppression efforts targeted law enforcement due to trends and pockets is critical to reducing violent crime. In order to be effective in crime reduction, which is immediate responses to crime data, officers need to be available and on patrol. Paul has given some recent statistics regarding marijuana arrests and disparity issues here in Philadelphia. Going back and looking at some recent data I found in 2010, which is a few years back, and I know these numbers are less today, but in 2010 you had more than 5,500 marijuana possession arrests, according to the ACLU here in the city of Philadelphia. It's not other crimes related to this, these are just marijuana possession arrests. This equates to approximately 14,000 man-hours of scarce police resources. That's 1,750 days that police officers are not on the streets patrolling. And every time an officer becomes busy with activities that are not related to reducing violent crime, outside of the strategic deployment plan, you run the risk of being ineffective in suppressing violent crime. Holes are created in both the offense and defense in law enforcement. Officers need to be mobile and they need to be visible. It needs to be an omnipresence of what we have in reducing crime. So eliminating the physical arrest of marijuana possession violations will not only benefit the Philadelphia Police Department, but also it will benefit the citizens involved. The physical arrest of citizens is very traumatic and sometimes a life-scarring event. Paul mentioned that even if you have a record expunged, it doesn't go away. I have an iPad right here in front of me, and I can find the arrest of just about anyone in this country because once it goes into a national database, it never, ever goes away. And that's what employers use as they go through their applicants for a new job. So in closing with my statement here, this adjustment can also benefit citizen-police relationships, especially with the disparities that we just heard mentioned. By reducing the number of negative police-citizens encounters, the opportunities for encounters gone wrong dramatically decrease. Fewer lawsuits should be experienced. This is also an opportunity for improving relationships between police and community. The police should take advantage of this opportunity in publicly announcing and promoting this new policy. With fewer negative police encounters, it's an opportunity for getting the citizenry involved in solving violent crime, which you desperately need as a law enforcement agency. So I urge you to work very hard at this policy in making this happen here in the city of Philadelphia. I also urge you to support your policymakers in Harrisburg as they move forward with even, larger efforts in changing these marijuana laws throughout your great state. So I thank you for allowing me to share that with you.
Thank you, Major. Appreciate it. Appreciate both your testimonies. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Morning.
Ms. Marconi, who do we have next?
Aaron Fleming and Michael DeJessa.
Are either here? Looks like we got one. Okay. All right, well, he can direct him up to the table when he comes back. Thank you. Sir, please have a seat, identify yourself for the record, and if I could ask everybody that might still be testifying, if we have written testimony from you, that will be made part of the record, and we'd appreciate any summarizing of your statements. But please, identify yourself and proceed.
Thank you. My name is Aaron Fleming. I'm a student at Temple University. I would just like to quickly share my own experiences with the
Sure.
current law. In September of 2012, I was arrested and charged with possession of a small amount of marijuana under the current legislation. I was arrested at 7 p.m. on the grounds of my university's campus with less than 2 grams of marijuana, and I was put in a holding cell for over 14 hours, during which I was in the company of people that were charged with violent and more severe crimes. Eventually, after hours of being processed, I was released at 9 a.m. the next morning. Needless to say, my whole ordeal was unpleasant and extremely upsetting to me. 3 months later, I paid a fine of $200 and enrolled in the city's small amounts course in order to expunge this criminal charge from my record. The entire experience, including the reprimands after the arrest, lasted for the entirety of 1 year, during which I had to suffer with the consequences of holding an arrest record. It is with these experiences behind me that I believe that the current legislation for small marijuana possession is unnecessarily harsh and does not offer as much positive effect onto the public as we're led to believe. What benefit did society gain for punishing someone without any prior history of violence or criminal activity over this? This unnecessary process also surprises me in terms of the police resources required to deal with the current rules of the law. During the course of my arrest, the arresting officer was required to call an additional 4 police officers for backup. The most surprising part of the event was when the backup arrived, they spent a large portion of that hour deciding whether to call in the report into headquarters or to dump out the marijuana and tell me to go home. They told the officer making the arrest that it was not worth his time and that the abundance of paperwork to deal with this was too cumbersome for this to be considered a necessary course of action. The fact that this current law is even opposed by our own police forces further proves how unnecessary the efforts are in carrying out the law and the burden it puts on our officers. I would like to add that I do not blame law officials, but rather the law that they are forced to uphold. I was simply a person that was minding my own business and showed complete cooperation with the officers by being respectful and courteous to their instructions. These additional officers were pulled from their other duties for a full hour, unable to return to their patrol and look out for more severe crime than this. My case is likely just one of the many that seems to have used up the time of the police officers that could have been used to protect the city from other crimes that affect the safety of the local citizens. And in my case, they seem to have been feeling the same way. Detaining anybody for possession of marijuana wastes necessary resources needed to actually make the city a safer place and causes more trouble onto the detainee than it is worth, which is why I believe it needs to be changed. Thank you.
Okay. But I don't want to lose the train.
Okay,
Just
all
real
right.
quick.
Okay, Councilman Kenney.
I'm just curious as how did the other officers not talk the arresting officer out of making the arrest? It seems that they were trying to not have you arrested, and why did the arresting officer insist?
I'm honestly not sure. The arresting officer was a Philadelphia police officer that was assigned to Temple. The rest were Temple security officers. There was 4 of them. 2 of them seemed to be more in charge, I don't know, experienced, and they talked to him. They just kind of pulled him over and talked to him for a while. I don't know why the actual reason of why.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Sir, please identify yourself and proceed.
Hello, my name is Michael DeJessa. As I sit here today in front of you, I am a criminal. I am a victim of failed public policy and circumstance. When I was a young adult in my early 20s, I was stopped by a police officer in South Philadelphia for a random stop and frisk, in which I willingly turned over under 30 grams of marijuana that qualifies as a small amount for the purpose of state and local law. Prior to the progressive advances made under District Attorney Seth Williams' SAM program, nonviolent citizens like myself were handcuffed, arrested, photographed, fingerprinted, and locked in a cell, typically overnight. Personally, I was detained at 11th Street Station in South Philadelphia for 12 hours, after which I was released on my own recognizance. I went in front of a judge, pleaded guilty, received a hefty fine over $100+ the cost of an education course. I provided community service. I was also the one thing that follows me everywhere, a criminal record. Every time I fill out a job application, have a routine traffic stop, I must suffer disproportionate scrutiny for the past 9 violent indiscretions. These range from being passed over as a potential hire to a routine traffic stop turning into an invasive full search. I also was also one that regarded Philadelphia police with honor and respect, I being named after my Uncle Michael, a fallen Philadelphia police officer. I've also appreciated the work they do, and I reflect often how glad I am I do not have to do it. But now, when I see police, I am weary and cautious. I can only imagine how much more anxiety and animosity other victims of this failed policy must feel towards police after their experience. I speak, of course, of the vast majority of Philadelphians who experience regular run-ins with the police and do not have relatives who have also worn a badge. I, a 33-year-old father of 3, realize how important it is to be on the right side of the law. However, this black mark will follow me forever, thanks to a failed policy that burdens not only me, but our city's fine law enforcement officers, overburdened judicial system, and our weary taxpayers. As I sit in front of you today, I speak from my heart. I ask you to please vote in favor of this bill so I can move towards a society where we have less criminals, more hard-working students, sons, daughters, and wage earners. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for your testimony. Mr. Jess, I know you said you were stopped on a random stop in Frisco. Mr. Fleming, you may have said this at the beginning, I may have missed it. What generated them to stop you to start with, do you know?
The arresting officer was hiding in some bushes, waiting for some college kids to just light up, I guess.
Okay. I'll reserve any other comment after that. Any other questions or comments? Thank you both very much. Thank you. Ms. Marconi, who you have?
Derek Rosenwig and Eric Altieri.
As they're coming forward, is there anyone else here that wishes to speak? Seeing none, these will be our final witnesses. In both your cases, we have your written testimony that will be made part of the record. If you could summarize, because both of them are a little on the lengthy side, I'd appreciate it, okay? Whoever would like to start.
Best attempt. Chairman Greenlee and Kenney, members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard on the subject of ending mandatory custodial arrest for possession of small amounts of marijuana. My name is Derek Rosenzweig. I grew up in Levittown and came to Philadelphia in 2001 to attend Drexel University, graduating from there in 2006 with a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science. My senior year at Drexel, I founded a chapter of Normal there to raise awareness of the issue among my fellow students. I lived in the city until 2010, until I moved out into the suburbs, Warminster, to be closer to my place of work. I love the city. It's a unique place, and I have many fond memories here. And truth be told, I'd still rather live here than in the suburbs. But one advantage that other counties have over Philadelphia, as mentioned before, is the ability of the police there to issue a citation on the spot for a fine or a summons to appear before court for the possession of small amounts of marijuana. It is my understanding that Philadelphia is the only county whose police are required by state law to perform a custodial arrest when a person is in violation of the law, a policy which, while not without a certain logic, is totally wasteful when you consider the sheer scale of the number of people who break the prohibition law on a daily basis. For the issue of possession of suspected marijuana, police in Philadelphia should be able to issue a citation or summons on the spot, just like police do in other counties. So what does it say when the city still arrests thousands of people per year for this, yet it barely scratches the surface of the number of people breaking this law? Since people generally won't admit to a felony on a federal survey, we unfortunately don't have data on how many people grow or sell marijuana here. However, to supply such a highly demanded commodity, a sizable number of people must be growing or selling marijuana in Philadelphia. Now, police arrested 2,342 people for sale or manufacture of cannabis in 2012. The true number of dealers is most certainly higher than that, but we'll never know. It's a completely opaque black market. From the perspective of a cannabis consumer, such as myself, it's also a raw deal. Artificially high prices, no strain choices, no quality control or potency labeling, shady dealers who don't work to any regular schedule, dealers who sell you something that isn't actually marijuana, or dealers who try to rip you off or rob you. These are just some of the issues that the average person has to deal with when attempting to purchase marijuana. But still, it's relatively easy to get. Anyone can get it. So what does it say when such a prohibition law exists in the United States and so many people are willing and able to break it? According to the latest Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration survey data, 20.2% of respondents aged 15 or older used marijuana in 2012. Philadelphia has a population of approximately 1,194,552 citizens aged 15 or older. Now, without adjusting for the same age distribution, approximately 241,300 citizens aged 15 or older used marijuana in 2012. Philadelphia police arrested 4,272 people for marijuana possession in 2012. In other words, for each person arrested for marijuana possession in Philadelphia in 2012, about 57 were not. These are rough estimates, but 1 to 57 is a huge ratio, and that kind of failure rate would never be tolerated for any kind of serious crime. And this happens year after year. Now, from 2009 to 2012, African Americans have borne an overwhelming brunt of marijuana prohibition enforcement, both for simple possession and for sales and manufacture. Now, according to a 2010 national survey on drug use, rates of use vary among race only by a few percentage points, meaning African Americans are no more likely to do drugs than any other race. Now, African Americans consist of only 43.2% of the population of Philadelphia County, and if you refer to the graphs that I submitted in my written testimony, as well as the data sheets, you can see very clearly that year after year, Philadelphia police arrest African Americans at a substantially higher rate than whites, Native Americans, or Asians. And for the record, in 2009, African Americans consisted of 82.3% of arrests for simple possession. In 2012, 82%. In 2011, 81.9%. And in 2012, 81.7%. This is not an isolated incident. Numbers don't lie and plainly indicate a pattern of targeted rather than equal enforcement, an issue that should be addressed immediately for the safety of the entire community. African Americans are 5.46 times as likely to get arrested as other races in Philadelphia for marijuana possession. This trend is present not only in Philadelphia, but throughout the entire nation, and it needs to end. Making small amounts of marijuana the lowest police priority, which this bill would do, would be a big factor in beginning to end this unconscionable arrest disparity. Now, support for marijuana legalization has never been higher than today. The latest Quinnipiac survey, released this past March 3rd, found that 48% of respondents support legalizing and regulating marijuana, with 49% opposed. The latest Mercyhurst survey, also released this past March, found that 48% are also in favor, with only 42% opposed. Combined, these show the highest support and lowest opposition to marijuana legalization at the same time in Pennsylvania history. The Mercyhurst survey also found that respondents favor decriminalization 59% to 34%, but prefer full legalization over decriminalization by 31 to 16%. The marijuana market is a fundamental truth of life in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and in the United States. It goes to show that marijuana prohibition laws create public safety and health problems, are in essence unenforceable, create an intolerable and unjust racial disparity, and are a failure of public policy of the highest magnitude. In closing, I would ask three things of this council. First, to pass this ordinance as soon as possible. In addition to helping resolve the racial disparity issue and ceasing the needless arrest of otherwise law-abiding citizens, it would save the city and its taxpayers a bundle of money. It is almost the most the city can do on its own. To that end, our second recommendation is to ask the council to pass a resolution calling for the Commonwealth to move forward Senate Bill 528, which would end marijuana prohibition throughout the entire state and set up a legal, regulated framework for cultivation, sale, and distribution. The City Council of Charlottesville, Virginia, passed a similar resolution in May of 2012, with Councilor Dave Norris stating, "I think it's perfectly legitimate for us to say as an elected body that there are other priorities and that we're going the wrong direction when it comes to the war on drugs." Third and finally, tomorrow night at 10 o'clock p.m., we ask you to tune in to CNN to watch Dr. Sanjay Gupta's brand new documentary on marijuana's use as medicine. I thank you for your time and your consideration on this important issue.
Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. Sir, please identify yourself and proceed.
I'm Eric Altieri, and I'm the Communications Director for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in D.C., and I was also born and spent most of my young life right here in Northeast Philadelphia. I'd like to focus my testimony today really on 3 key areas, and those areas are efficacy, equality, and feasibility. The first area I'd like to touch on is efficacy, and efficacy is something that we must consider when weighing the worth of any law. Does this law work as intended, and does its application have the desired outcomes? The answer to both of those questions when it comes to our marijuana policy is a resounding no. According to the University of Michigan's Ann Arbor's annual Monitoring the Future survey, which they've conducted every year since the mid-1970s, minors have reported that marijuana is very easy to acquire, significantly easier than currently regulated alcohol and tobacco products. And this has been true for decades. And there is a simple reason for this, and that is that drug dealers do not check ID. By taking alcohol and tobacco off the street corner and putting it behind the counter of state-regulated business, we have managed to implement strict frameworks that control who can get their hands on these products and when. This is in stark contrast to our policy of total prohibition on marijuana, a policy which at its core is complete absence of control or regulation. The survey also revealed that the use of alcohol and tobacco products among all grades has fallen consistently since the mid-1990s and now stands at all-time historic lows. We managed to achieve these successes not by arresting people for possessing these products, but by tightly controlling them with regulatory schemes and by educating our youth on the potential harms of these substances. Education and regulation have proven infinitely more successful and kinder to individual liberties and government finances than 40 years of prohibiting marijuana ever has. And the second aspect we must consider is the equality of the law and its application, which we've already touched on in much previous testimony here in terms of racial disparities. Pennsylvania leads most other states in the country when it comes to total number of marijuana arrests, with over 21,000 individuals a year. And locally in Philadelphia in 2012, there were over 6,600 arrests. Worse than the financial burdening of city budgets is the collateral damage this policy has on the lives of those caught possessing marijuana. On top of having to endure the embarrassment and social stigma that goes with an arrest, a criminal charge for a marijuana offense closes the door to future opportunity, can force these individuals into a cycle of recidivism, and imposes a massive financial burden on them from which they may never recover. With this charge on their record, they will be denied access to public housing, ineligible for federal financial aid for college, and be removed from consideration at many places of employment. This unduly burdens these individuals for life. Individuals, as the arrest statistics show, are already facing great amounts of economic and social injustice. The Philadelphia SAM program has begun to unravel some of this damage a marijuana charge has on an individual, and this proposed measure will go further in reducing the destructive impact these laws have on our communities. And finally, I'd like to touch on feasibility. Is it feasible for Philadelphia to move forward on this policy? And in our opinion, pursuing this policy is not only feasible, but it is required to end the city's overly punitive and discriminatory enforcement of these laws. And a number of U.S. cities have already moved in this direction and have been for some time, including Kalamazoo, Detroit, Fayetteville, Arkansas, Portland, Maine, Austin, Texas, and others. These laws have largely worked as intended, and a study just released this week from Massachusetts shows that the percentage of youth who have tried marijuana in their lifetimes has decreased 6% in just the past 2 years. Massachusetts made the possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana a civil violation punishable by a simple fine in 2008. In addition to these localities, 16 states have also implemented decriminalization policies. And most recently, and perhaps most notably, the District of Columbia City Council approved a measure this month in a 10-to-1 vote that reduced possession of up to 1 ounce to a civil violation punishable by a small $25 fine and requiring no arrest and generating no criminal record. The D.C. City Council embraced this policy and approved it based on many of the arguments against criminal prohibition I have outlined and others have outlined here today. The council members were overwhelmingly supportive of this policy change and viewed it as imperative to ending the social injustice playing out in the streets of the city under prohibition. The measure is also supported by the district's mayor and is expected to be signed into law very shortly. They approved this measure because it was the right thing to do. They had the courage to lead on this issue, and they made progress towards ending these racially disparate arrests and the damage they are causing in the district. I'd urge this committee and the full Philadelphia City Council to show the same courage as their counterparts in D.C. have and act to approve this legislation. Thank you for your time and for your consideration.
Okay, thank you both very much. Councilman Kenney?
Thank you very much. Did you attend school here in
In
Philadelphia?
Philadelphia, I attended elementary school at St. Williams.
Where did you go further or no?
No, I had moved out of the city after that.
I'm curious, and maybe you could be helpful. I mean, college is probably the period of time where you smoke the most weed. I'm just wondering whether or not we have a reputation as a city for being that harsh on possession that it would make somebody think about going somewhere else, or that doesn't occur?
No. New York, by and far, arrests people at a substantially higher rate. Was it like around 50,000 people or something like that?
New York?
Get arrested in New York City every year
And they're
for marijuana.
custodial arrests?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, yes, because they have the disparity in their law where simply possessing the product is decriminalized, but the second it leaves your pocket and is in public view, it's still a criminal misdemeanor.
So it could be in your pocket, but it can't be in front.
And unfortunately, with their stop and frisk policy, they ask you to empty your pockets, and all of a sudden you've gone from a civil violation to a criminal misdemeanor.
But marijuana use, I mean, it spans all racial, social, class, and political boundaries. It doesn't, people in college generally do tend to experiment more, but in general, people use it at about equal rates across age groups.
But it's not your experience that Philadelphia has a particularly bad reputation amongst college students?
No.
Because that's one of when you said you moved out of Philadelphia County and you'd love to live here, I'm wondering whether or not that's something.
No, I moved out because my workplace was far away and I didn't feel like driving half hour every day through.
And our other witness, indicated that the officer was hiding in the bushes out at Temple. I want to make sure that we're not, that one other benefit of this law and the change in policy may be that we're not locking college kids up too.
In my
along with the regular
experience
citizens.
on the issue, police often look the other way when dealing with small amounts of marijuana. Arresting people, everyone they see for a marijuana offense is already seen by many officers as pointless exercise. I mean, as people testified earlier to. But, and even over the years, informally talking to officers, especially the civil affairs, who every year come out to our cannabis march that we do down on South Street, the police actively ignore people smoking marijuana, and we have hundreds of attendees. So for the most part, Philadelphia is seen as a fairly lax city, I think, in terms of marijuana enforcement, but the numbers don't lie. It's still happening, and this bill is definitely the right step. They're in the right direction.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Good?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, I was struck by the data from Massachusetts, and I don't challenge the data, but I guess the question is, what do you see as connection between the decriminalization of marijuana and less use over lifetime? Is there any more information from that data report that suggests why that would be the case?
Well, I'd be gladly to send over the studies, but also that's not an isolated incident. One of the largest studies ever partaken by the federal government has shown that reducing penalties for marijuana has had little to no effect on increasing marijuana use amongst either youth or the general population.
Well, I guess my question is, do you believe that it lessens the use?
Yes, I do.
And what is that based upon?
I think that's based upon, usually when these places move in this direction, it fosters a much more rational discussion on the relative harms and relative risks of marijuana use itself. Whereas currently in a lot of education programs, we tell children and others that marijuana is bad, it's all bad, it's as bad as heroin, and they stop believing the rhetoric they're getting. When they move to a decriminalization or legalization or medical policy, we kind of move away from that and start to really see more fact-based evidence being presented.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, one more time, anyone else here wishes to speak? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing of the Committee on Law and Government. We will now, go into the public meeting. The Chair recognizes Councilman Kenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, before I offer the amendments, that these amendments are as a result of the meetings with both the Law Department, the DA's office, and the police, and the issue over whether or not we have, as a council, the authority to pass something like this. We changed most of the language from a shall clause to a may clause. So basically what this does is it gives the sense of the council, puts in place a vehicle to change the policy, but it's not forcing the police department to change the policy. They've said it on record they're willing to look at changing it, so this is hopefully the vehicle we can use. So with that being said, I would like to offer the amendments that were circulated to the members of the committee to bill number 140001.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor of the amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the amendments are adopted. Councilman Kenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that bill number 140001, as amended, be reported out of this committee favorably and a request made for rule suspension to allow for first reading at our next council session.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, Bill number 140001 as amended is reported out as committee with a favorable recommendation with a rule suspension to allow for first reading our next session of council. That concludes the business before the Law and Government Committee today. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Jim.